Hey, everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petralia, back with the first episode of season number 3 of the Code Reds podcast. It should be another exciting Cincinnati Reds season. A lot of fans around Reds country certainly hope that is the case. And this podcast is a proud member, as always, of the CLNS Media Network. To kick off season number 3, it is my pleasure to welcome Pat Brennan of the Cincinnati Enquirer. He does a fabulous job covering all things Cincinnati Reds. Now that the Reds season is certainly starting to pick up, and we can get into that with Pat in a few moments. Certainly that got kicked into higher gear, I would say, over the weekend with the annual RedsFest that returned to the newly renovated Cincinnati Convention Center. And we can talk about Pat's big takeaways from that. But first, we want to get to the news. And you have a story on Cincinnati.com. You had it over the weekend, Pat, speaking with Nick Kroll, confirming the story that was first broken by the Athletics' C. Trent Rosecrans, that Elly Cruz turned down a contract offer from the Cincinnati Reds that would have surpassed the club record 10-year, $225 million extension that Joey Votto signed way back in 2012. What did you infer? What did you glean from conversations with Nick Kroll and Reds officials you spoke to?
Well, my first thought was that was not so much of a departure from the Reds' typical personnel behavior, other than the fact that there was some recognition of the dollar amount it would take to lock up an Elly Cruz. And that number, 9 figures, that's certainly a departure from this strategy, which they've employed with other players to varying levels of success. Hunter Green comes to mind. And the strategy is basically, maybe reward them with a dollar figure and years of stability in terms of the contract that maybe is ahead of schedule, but also isn't ahead of schedule in the sense that you project these players to be a big part of your club down the line anyway, so why not just lock them up now? And if you can do it for a smaller dollar amount than it would take after they've developed and after they've hit the open market, then that's just advantageous and good business for the Cincinnati Reds. I think they've tried to do that with several members of this young core. I won't say any names because I can't recall exactly who else, but I know to a certainty they have approached other members of this young core, yes, this young infield core, with the same tact in mind. And then obviously with Elly Cruz, based on what a lot of us think he will be in his career and what he projects out to be, yeah, if you're going to do that with Elly, that strategy is still going to require an eye-popping number.
And one of the reasons I think it makes sense to do it with Elly at his age is he's much more than just a baseball commodity. He is the face, as we like to say, the face of the franchise.
Yeah.
We both cover the Bengals, and we know what that is with Joe Burrow, and to a lesser degree, but still significant, with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. They are definitely faces of the future that franchise wants to put out there in the city of Cincinnati to sell tickets, to sell suites, to do everything you want to do with those kind of names. So the Reds know that with Hunter Green. Obviously, they 6 years, $54 million, I believe it was, extending him through 2028. And he is under contract. And that was a very, very smart deal by the Reds to get that one done. But with Scott Boras, and I want you to address this, because with Scott Boras and, Elly and Matt McLain, the other infielder, I think we can surmise the Reds would probably like to get a deal done with him, although he's got injury history. Those are the two players. It's going to be tough with Scott Boras' clients, because Scott is going to say, well, you can buy out some of the arbitration and make more money up front, but you're going to lose money because with Elly, in let's say years 5 or 6 of the deal, you could be making double or almost triple the amount that you're getting in a deal with the Reds up front.
Yeah, I mean, and that's true. That's the Reds are, there's a gamble involved on both sides of this. For the Reds, the gamble is, what if the player doesn't materialize into what we hoped they would be? And for the player, it's, what if I do develop into what I project out to be? Because on the open market, I'd be worth a heck of a lot more in 2028 or whatever the year might be than what the Reds would be paying me if I signed today. So, and I think Boras, as you pointed out, Scott Boras clients tend to end up being steered away from the tact that the Reds have taken with members of this current clubhouse. So, and I think in the case of Elly De La Cruz, he is the face of the franchise. He's an incredibly exciting player. He put up no doubt all-star numbers last year and played almost half a season on a quadriceps injury. So, and the numbers were down during that injury period, but this is just still such an exciting player. So there's merit to both sides for him. He's in a fortunate position because I don't think there's a wrong answer for him, but I wouldn't be surprised if Scott Boras had coached him, and evidently that was the case based on the outcome of the Reds' approach with their contract extension offer, that better to bet on yourself is
Yes.
basically.
I mean, that's what this comes down to, right, Pat?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're turning down that offer, you're betting on yourself to continue your development through the next several years and to make a good amount of money in arbitration. Probably you're talking about 25, $30 million at some point during his arbitration eligible status, which I believe with Elly comes up in 2027. I believe that's accurate. So in 2 seasons or next year, he'd become arbitration eligible. And that's when you start betting on yourself. And then, whether or not the Reds can buy him out remains to be seen. I want to read this quote from your story on Cincinnati.com and the Cincinnati Enquirer. If you think a player has a chance to a long-term part of your club, to be a long-term part of your club, then you want to figure out how to make them part of the longest part they can be. It's just trying to figure out what works for you and what works for the player. There's players that have turned it down. I totally understand where they're coming from too, because they're trying to do what's best for their family, and their calculation is, hey, I'm going to do this and this and this. Our calculation, meaning Nick Kroll, is trying to figure out what is best for the organization, and you're trying to figure out where you both are and what makes best sense for everyone.
Yeah.
Nick Kroll.
I mean, and that was just Nick, kind of in layman's terms, explaining the strategy that they have used to try to keep this young core together. Everyone recognizes that the Reds are in kind of a moment right now. They're in a window of opportunity, and perhaps fortuitously, but they also earned it. They wound up in the playoffs last year, and that was really an important experience for this team. It was also, I think, proof positive that they're doing things right. They beat out the Mets and their massive payroll. Now, the Mets had an incredibly, borderline, a fringe historic collapse to miss the playoffs again last season. But, the Reds are in a good place with this good core group, and it's no secret how the Reds do business now. They're not going to get into these bidding wars on the open market for 9-figure sums and players of that caliber. They're going to build, and if they're going to win, they're going to win by drafting well, developing well, coaching these guys up, and there's some recognition that they have a good group. They happened to a couple generations of good drafts supplemented with good signings, and you have the makings of a winner here, and managed by Terry Francona. So there is a sense that you'd like to keep this group together, but like Nick mentioned in that quote, Trags, some guys go for this strategy and they see the value in it, and there's business to be done there, and some guys simply don't, and they're the ones betting on themselves.
So a little bit of off-season news regarding Elly. He is not going to take part in the World Baseball Classic per the Reds' request. And I think it's interesting that Elly honored the request of the Reds coming off a significant, I won't label it severe, but a significant quadriceps injury. They wanted that left quad to heal completely, so he is ready to go for the team that is paying his salary in 2026. I think it's a win-win. Look, the World Baseball Classic is terrific if you're fully healthy coming into the season and you want to use it to generate some excitement for yourself and your country heading into the season. And again, you're fully healthy. But that's not the case with Elly. And I think he realizes this is a pretty critical season for himself and the organization, knowing that the roster comes back pretty close to in full shape, and a lot is being relied upon Elly De La Cruz for the Reds' success this year.
Yeah, you could see we had that conversation with Elly on Friday night at RedsFest. You could see pain isn't the right word, but maybe the sadness of not being able to participate in the WBC this year, because it has turned into, I don't think it was ever a small event, Trags, but it's really turned into a big ticket thing that people are really invested in. And you want a young player like that to enjoy his baseball. And if the WBC is a place where he can do that, you do want him to have that. But everything you just said is true. This just isn't the year. It didn't work out with Elly in terms of the quad injury. And it sounds like they had an amicable, they reached
discussion.
that resolution amicably. I think it was fair for the Reds to ask that of Elly, and I think it certainly speaks to his character that he honored it and then came out publicly and talked about all the reasons why he supported it, the decision. So, I think for Reds fans, cool. It would have been neat to see Elly in quasi meaningful games as early as early March, but there'll be a time for that. I don't know if Elly will be a Red when that time comes, but this just isn't the moment. And in a relatively in a slow off season so far, I think there was a lot of interest in whether or not Elly would do this, and there was certainly an expectation from the Dominican Republic organization, the national team, that he was going to be there. I think Albert Pujols said as much during the MLB's winter meetings. So some other weird things happened along the way in terms of publicizing Elly's participation, and then posts being deleted from social media about his participation. So it became a thing.
On the Dominican side, Pat?
MLB.
Oh, on MLB. See, that's where I think everybody at MLB's got to get their ducks in a row. They have to have some awareness that Elly is coming off a significant injury, and he's part of your brand, meaning MLB's brand, for 6 to 8 months.
He is, and they really put him forward in a big way. We're talking
very much since 2023 when he debuted.
Yeah, I mean, that MLB on social media is an interesting thing. The people do a great job, but it's like a fire hose, just spouting constantly. So I'm not surprised that they get.
That's true.
I'm not surprised they get things wrong.
They put out a lot of content.
A ton of content. So when that's the case, I think you're probably more likely to get something important wrong.
Speaking with Pat Brennan of the Cincinnati Enquirer, covering the Cincinnati Reds in episode 1 of Code Reds for 2026, season number 3. I want to move on to another player who spoke and get your takeaways from Matt McLain.
Yeah.
Everyone knows he had a very disappointing 2025 coming off the shoulder surgery of 2024. This is a pivotal season for Matt McLain. It's a pivotal season for the Reds offense. A lot of people are expecting and depending upon him to produce a lot more. Do you get the sense that he's feeling some of that pressure?
I think he's aware of the realities of the situation, which is maybe a tamer way to say pressure was not I didn't come away from my conversation with Matt thinking, ooh, this guy's really under fire right now, and he senses it. That just wasn't. I mean, the way he said it, and I think he talked about it this way in past interviews. He puts pressure on himself every off season, going into every season, every spring training. So there's that piece. It was interesting, Trags. I'd like to know what you thought about this, but it wasn't until late, maybe even after this season, when the idea of Matt, the timetable relative to the surgery and the injury that he had, there was no talk of, oh, well, it takes, 12 to 18 months is really when you start to see the person come back into. That didn't come into the conversation until later in the year, which was just interesting to me as he struggled the entire season, and no one said anything along those lines.
That is.
And
I'll tell you why that's interesting. I'm going to jump in here.
Because it sounds like window dressing after the fact.
But when you look at his numbers for the last 6 weeks, especially his power numbers versus the first 4.5 months, he had a significant uptick. You could see the power coming back.
Yeah.
And I'm not expecting Matt McLain to be Spencer Steer in terms of power, but he's got that in him. When he's fully healthy, he can hit 20 to 25 home runs. You put those 20 to 25 home runs in there with Noelvi Marte still growing as a major league hitter and a power hitter, and with Spencer Steer and with Sal Stewart, you don't have the need as much to go out and get a Kyle Schwarber. But again, what the Reds are relying on, what they're hoping for, is a healthy Matt McLain to solidify the middle of the infield. I know we're up against the clock a little bit here, but I thought
we're okay. We're okay, Trags.
Good. Thank you. With Gavin Lux, trading him away for another arm, I thought was a very wise, smart, and just a very savvy move by Nick Krall. Look, Nick Krall and obviously Reds ownership and Brad Metter have been under the microscope and been criticized pretty heavily by a lot of Reds fans. Who, when they didn't get Schwarber, they were like, well, you're just going to quit? You're going to give up? I don't think that Nick Krall has had as bad of an offseason as a lot of Reds fans think, simply because I think they've built up the bullpen. They've made some room by trading away Gavin Lux. I don't sense the log jam on the infield and in the roster like I did coming into spring training last year.
I think that's a great analysis. And when we met with Nick and Brad following the wild card sweep, I guess it was the week after that, Trags, in the GM suite at Great American Ballpark, and Nick was talking about having to rebuild the bullpen. I thought, I just hate the phrasing of that. And
the optics were not pretty,
and just a daunting task. But man, I really like what they've done with the bullpen. I'll try to cut myself short of any hyperbole, but I really like it, and I
do too.
Where my mind goes is I wonder if this bullpen is better than the one that they had last year, and that was really one of the strengths of the team. It's a very similar team to last year's, but with the Gavin Lux trade, you have opened up part of the log jam, as you put it on Twitter, about, not blocking Sal Stewart's path to playing time, which could happen at a couple different spots. But it's I've heard people kind of cynically say of the Reds, hope is not a strategy, but it's not hard to see how this team could be better than last year's team. And you might say, well, what's the value of that? They won 83 games. The value in that is that 83 games is going to buy you a ticket to contention every day of the week in this expanded playoff era, when the third wild card is just going to be hanging out there some years begging for someone to take it. Last year happened to be the most extreme case of that we've seen. The Reds' 83 wins were the fewest needed to take that third wild card spot. But you're going to have that some years. Some years it does look like a more formidable playoff field. But what we've seen now in the sample size, Trags, of the expanded playoff era is that it's not going to take a juggernaut to get that ticket punched in the third wild card spot, and sometimes even the second wild card spot. If the Reds can compete with that, you just need to get in. There's a lot of value in getting in to the playoffs. We've seen the third wild card win the NL twice in this expanded playoff era. This is a team that will contend to some degree late into the season, I think, and should right now, I think favorably looks a lot like where we left off with the team last year.
Let's really quickly here wrap up what the Reds have been able to do in terms of restructuring the bullpen and the roster in general. First of all, they re-signed Emilio Pagan, 2 years, $20 million. The second year is a mutual option, but they bring back their closer, which Andrew Abbott mentioned to me over the weekend at RedsFest. People forget how important it was for them to bring that piece back, but he was definitely an addition. He wasn't just someone they re-signed. He was out there in free agency, and they had to actively pursue him and get him back on the roster. They did that. They have Pierce Johnson, who they signed. They got him in free agency. They traded for Brock Burke in the Gavin Lux deal, a lefty, and they signed Caleb Ferguson, another lefty. So they've really revamped the bullpen. And they've only added really the two outfield bats, J.J. Bleday and Dane Myers. And right now, Austin Hayes is out there kind of wandering in the wind, whatever the expression is. But anyway, that's where we are right now with the Reds roster. Your thoughts as we wrap it up?
Obviously, I think there's clearly... If Reds fans had their druthers, I think a lot of them would like to have seen an injection of more power. There was not a lot of power being generated by this team over the course of 162 last year. So maybe that's a push in that area. Maybe if you want to say Matt McClain projects to have a little more power based on his kind of final say in 2025. Okay, I'm open to that. And you would have liked to have found some version of a bat that could have insulated Elly De La Cruz. But, I had a player tell me this weekend that some people in the organization feel like those answers are already rostered. Those pieces are there. The injury situations that Spencer Steer was dealing with last year, that Matt McClain was dealing with last year. I might not like the timing of when certain information was introduced into the conversations, but those are real things at the end of the day. And when you're talking about, as Terry Francona did over the weekend at RedsFest, the idea of Spencer Steer healthy right out of the gate instead of, maybe a month into the season like last year, pick up that
It
could be the
seemed like
difference.
Spencer Steer was battling something for the first half of last year. Like
Yeah,
he was,
I mean, I agree. Yeah. So, but if the proposition is, hey, some of these guys that you fell in love with in 2023 are gonna, be bought in, have their heads on straight, healthy, all of it. You're getting the full package there. You're there. Yeah, it's hard to quantify what they're bringing, but it's going to be more than what they brought last year. And that, I think, is where some of the, let's call it a bet, is that this team could be greater than the sum of its parts last season.
all right. He is Pat Brennan, does a fabulous job covering all things Cincinnati Reds. And I might add the Cincinnati Bengals, but that's a different podcast for the Cincinnati Enquirer and Cincinnati.com. Pat, I want to thank you very much for taking time out.
Trags, thanks for your patience today.
You betcha. Anytime. Look, I'm used to it with you, Pat, but I'm just giving you too much grief. Anyway, for those of you listening to this show, we ask you to subscribe to the Code Reds podcast, like, and of course, leave a review, good, bad, or indifferent. And for those watching the show on CLNS, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the CLNS Media and Cincinnati Sports Studio YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bengals and Reds and Cincinnati sports content. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the instant a new video drops. For Pat Brennan, my name is Mike Petralia Trags, and thanks for watching this episode of the Code Reds podcast.